One of the most memorable events in boxing history, especially if you're Canadian, is the 1966 title bout between Muhammad Ali and George Chuvalo. Although Chuvalo didn't win, he gained tremendous respect and fame for going 15 rounds with Ali, and secured his place as a serious contender. An interesting sidebar to the story is the fact that Chuvalo's path to this fight led through Muskoka, where he had spent a few weeks training during the previous summer. George Chuvalo was born and raised in Toronto, in the tough West Side neighborhood called the Junction. He became interested in boxing while just a boy, and before long was taking lessons and training at nearby clubs. In May 1955, while only 17, Chuvalo won a boxing tournament that saw him crowned Canadian amateur heavyweight champion. With this, he had the opportunity to go to the upcoming Olympics in Australia, but in the spring of 1956, eager to start making money, he decided to turn pro instead. In September of 1958, Chuvalo became the heavyweight champ again, but now in the pro class. The next 3 years brought George both successes and disappointments in the ring. He wasn't making much progress toward his real goal, becoming the world champion, and he wasn't making much money either, an even bigger concern now that he had a family of his own. Looking for a change, Chuvalo split with his manager and didn't do any serious fighting for nearly 2 years. By September of 1963, however, he had a new trainer and was ready to get back in the game. But he still needed a new manager to handle the business side of his career. Enter Irving Ungerman. A Toronto businessman known as the Chicken King, Ungerman was an unorthodox choice for a boxing manager, but not so strange as one might think. He had known George since he was a boy, due to the fact that Chuvalo's mother was a long-time employee of the Ungerman family's poultry shop. Irv Ungerman was also very interested in boxing. As a teenager, he had taken up the sport, mainly to defend himself against bullies, and he had done well as an amateur fighter. But his small stature, he was classed as a featherweight, meant that he wasn't destined to become a professional. With World War II raging, in 1942, he joined the Royal Canadian Air Force instead. Before he went overseas, he spent several months training other recruits in the basics of boxing. After the war, Irv Ungerman returned to the family business, determined to make it grow. By the early 1960s, he was doing quite well. Ungerman had been following Chuvalo's career with interest, and when George's mother asked if he could help him, the idea of getting back into the world of boxing appealed to him. However, it wasn't until early 1964 that Chuvalo finally asked Ungerman to take on the role of his manager. He realized that Ungerman's business savvy and connections would be an asset, and Ungerman was willing and able to spend the money needed to take Chuvalo's career to the next level. Chuvalo began getting more fights, especially with serious American contenders. On February 1, 1965, Chuvalo fought former champ Floyd Patterson at Madison Square Garden in New York. The match got a lot of publicity and was a sellout, and the winner was promised a bout with the current heavyweight champion, Muhammad Ali, or Cassius Clay as he was first known. It was a tough but fairly even fight, and Patterson won the decision on points, though some commentators thought that Chuvalo deserved the win. He would have to wait a little longer for his shot at the title. In the meantime, he and Ungerman would take a trip to Muskoka. George Chuvalo was a big city boy who might never have visited Muskoka if not for Irving Ungerman. Ungerman was Chuvalo's Muskoka connection, but he had grown up in the city too, so one might wonder how he was connected to that famous cottage and resort area to the north. His introduction to Muskoka had begun with the Gateway Hotel. Shortly after World War II, Irving Ungerman's two older brothers, along with some other investors, purchased a large property in Gravenhurst that they planned to turn into a hotel. Originally the Calidore Sanatorium, this tuberculosis treatment center had been expanded over the years, then closed in the mid-1930s. It was taken over by the government during the war and used as a prisoner of war camp, housing hundreds of captured German soldiers. A good location for a hotel, it was close to the water and had plenty of room. Anyone who's taken a steamboat ride from Gravenhurst has passed by this property, which is only about 5 minutes out from the dock. But there aren't any buildings left there to see today. The Gateway Hotel did good business for over a decade, catering mainly to a Jewish clientele. Naturally enough, Ungerman's brother Jack bought a cottage nearby, and about 1957 Irving bought some property and built one for himself too. This was located not far from Gravenhurst, on the eastern end of Pine Lake, near the highway that runs north to Bala. Irving Ungerman came to love his Muskoka sanctuary and spent as much time there as he could. After becoming Chuvalo's manager in 1964, Ungerman enlisted the help of former heavyweight champ Rocky Marciano in lining up matches for George. With his extensive contacts in the boxing world, Marciano would be able to find some opponents for Chuvalo to fight. Marciano soon came up with a proposed bout for that July, and all three men traveled to Ungerman's cottage to sign the contract and celebrate. A couple of years later, Joe Louis would also join the team as an advisor. In fact, Irving Ungerman had first met Rocky Marciano at the Gateway Hotel in July of 1956. Marciano had been there to visit the training camp of another boxer, Archie Moore. Moore was an American who had come to Canada for a match against Canadian heavyweight champ James J. Parker at Maple Leaf Gardens. Parker himself, who lived in Barrie, was also training for the upcoming fight in the region at Muskoka Lodge near Huntsville. The local press gave both boxers plenty of attention as they prepared for the bout on July 25th. In the end, Parker lost the fight to Moore, and 2 years after that, Parker met and was defeated by the up-and-coming Chuvalo, who took the Canadian heavyweight title from him. Boxing camps in Muskoka were not therefore unprecedented, and so the summer of 1965 saw Chuvalo arriving here for a camp of his own. This was handy for Ungerman, since he could attend the camp while staying at his cottage. They didn't go to the Gateway Hotel, however, probably because by this time it was no longer owned by his brothers. Instead, Irving Ungerman arranged to have the camp at the Joe Gawa Hotel on the other side of Gravenhurst. This motor hotel was situated right beside what used to be Highway 11 but is now Bethune Drive. Starting in mid-July, the camp lasted a few weeks and was open to the public. Chuvalo enjoyed his time in Muskoka and later told a local newspaper reporter that he would like to come back. It wasn't clear at the time who Chuvalo would be meeting next. He wanted to fight Muhammad Ali, but it looked like he would have to beat a boxer named Ernie Terrell first. Terrell was also looking for a match with Ali in order to unify the WBC and WBA heavyweight titles. Finally, a date was set between Chuvalo and Terrell for November 1st at Maple Leaf Gardens. Terrell won the decision based on points, but Chuvalo was outraged, feeling that he had obviously been the better fighter, and he wasn't the only one who thought so. Following this, a title fight between Terrell and Muhammad Ali was scheduled for March 29th in Chicago. But in the meantime, Ali's controversial remarks on the Vietnam War, made at the prospect of being drafted, were met with a serious backlash that resulted in the fight being banned, first in Chicago and then in many other U.S. cities. Turning to Canada as a possible venue, The fight promoters met with resistance even in Toronto. Irving Ungerman helped lobby to get the fight approved, though, and Harold Ballard finally agreed to host it at Maple Leaf Gardens. In return for using his influence, Ungerman was promised that Chuvalo would get a match against the winner. Less than 3 weeks before the fight, Ernie Terrell dropped out. Rather than cancel the event, the promoters invited Chuvalo to replace him. Finally getting a lucky break, Chuvalo was now going to have his dream match, fighting for the heavyweight championship of the world. He had been waiting to get in the ring with Ali for a few years now. He didn't even care that he had less than usual time to prepare. It was a monumental fight, lasting the full 15 rounds. Although Ali was quick-moving and landed plenty of punches, he couldn't knock Chuvalo out, or even down, like he had so many others. In contrast, Chuvalo moved in and punished Ali with body blows, and Ali reportedly went to the hospital after, in worse shape than Chuvalo. In the end, Ali was declared the winner, retaining his title, but George Chuvalo put up a great fight and proved how good he was, forever silencing those who had underestimated him. With his reputation better than ever, Chuvalo had plenty of matches over the next few years. One of the most significant bouts was the one against Joe Frazier, which took place on July 19, 1967, at Madison Square Garden. Frazier was a tough fighter who had never been beaten, and a contender for the world title. To prepare for the challenge, Chuvalo and Ungerman returned to Muskoka, but this time set up their training camp on the grounds of the Gateway Hotel, which was now closed. They spent 2 weeks there in June before going to New York. Unfortunately, Chuvalo lost again, largely due to an eye injury he had suffered in his previous bout. After the cut on his right eye began bleeding, the fight was stopped in the 4th round, and Frazier was awarded a technical knockout. Another disappointment for George. Chuvalo went on to fight George Foreman in 1970, and then in May of 1972, he went up against Muhammad Ali again, this time in Vancouver. Though the fight wasn't for the world title like before, the rematch was highly publicized, with their rivalry played up like a big drama. Ali may not have been as quick as he used to be, but he delivered far more hits than Chuvalo. Still, he couldn't knock the Canadian champ down, and George lasted the full 12 rounds, though he did suffer a serious cut on his forehead. After the final bell rang, the judges awarded Ali the win. By the mid-1970s, George Chuvalo's boxing career was more or less over, although he would reclaim the Canadian title in a match in 1977. By this time, Chuvalo and Ungerman had parted ways, though Ungerman remained involved in the sports world as a promoter. After 1967, Chuvalo never trained in Muskoka again, and it doesn't appear that he ever bought a cottage here, as many athletes do. Irving Ungerman, on the other hand, continued to enjoy his cottage on Pine Lake for the rest of his life. In the late 1990s, he purchased the former Gateway Hotel property and donated the waterfront portion of it to the town of Gravenhurst. Now known as Ungerman Gateway Park, its main feature is a big, immovable rock that juts out into the bay. They should name that after George Chuvalo.